Wait, we'll go presently to the agenda, and the staff will be responding to the questions that you and your other submitters have raised. All right, well, can I remind people of item 4 on the agenda, the declaration of interest, and that takes us to item 5. Gerard, would you like to come as a seat between the councillors just over there? Or if you want to sit up there, that's entirely your call. And could we have the staff up at the table, please? Richard and Jendi. Welcome. Before we start, and I'll give you the opportunity in a moment to make some comments about your report and about where we are, but I wanted to first of all congratulate you really on pretty much unqualified success of the new bylaw and the way it's been administered. I think a lot of the things you traverse in your report, I'm not saying things are perfect, just so our submitters don't go AWOL on me, but it is certainly much better than was the case last season and previously, and we've had fewer issues because of the way you've managed them around the signage and around the interesting question of the high levels of compliance, which we'll come to when you talk about the report, and bill paying, fine paying in that respect. But clearly there are a number of challenges that remain. So I wanted to ask you first of all if you can talk about your report, and then as part of that, please, can you traverse the issues of the requirement to accommodate freedom campers, whether you can charge, the 3 things that have been raised by people in the public forum. And if you miss anything, councillors will ask. So the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I'll just kick off then and just respond to Councillor Thompson's question from 4. So and Reece, maybe just correct me if I'm wrong, what I heard was seeking a ban on non-self-contained as opposed to a complete ban on freedom camping. The case law that, and we did look at it extensively when we were drafting the new bylaw, suggests that a total ban or a prohibition on freedom camping outright is not would not be successful and would likely be challenged and be overturned. What a lot of councils are doing is seeking to ban all non-self-contained camping. That is something that's happening in areas now. That's something that was discussed during the review of the bylaw last year, and it was decided through discussions with the community boards and council that there was a desire to provide the non-self-contained camping sites, and 2 were identified that had been used during the trial that was supported by the community board for ongoing provision for non-self-contained camping. So does that, Councillor?
The councils that have moved to ban non-self-contained, how recent is that, and has there been has there been sufficient time to get a sense as to whether somebody's likely to challenge that or hasn't?
I wouldn't think there has been sufficient time. No. Right. So I suppose the most active group in the market's probably not the right word, but the New Zealand Motor Caravan Association, who are obviously very much interested in the self-contained camping, yeah. And working very closely with them, which we do currently, sort of allays that issue around, and they have the financial backing and the resources to challenge, and they're the ones that have challenged previously. I'm not aware of any instances where non-self-contained camping, the prohibition of non-self-contained camping has been challenged. That hasn't happened as far as I'm aware.
Right, but I may be wrong about this, but the only people I could imagine who would be likely to challenge that would be the hire companies. Hence my question, is it too soon to get a sense of whether or not that's, that in fact they've just accepted that, or whether it's too soon to know that?
Yeah, my view is it would be too soon to.
Okay.
While we're dealing with those specific issues, have you got any comment to make about the potential for charging people for use of these sites?
So as it currently stands, you can't charge for infrastructure improvements at a site. There is an opportunity for communities to ask for donations. Yeah.
You traversed that in the report. Now, do you want to make some comments about the nature of the report and the comments you make in it before we go to wider questions?
Yeah, I guess just generally, I think we would certainly agree with all ends of the spectrum as far as the feedback goes. It's not perfect, but from an office perspective, I think we feel it has been successful as far as implementing a new bylaw, but recognise that there has been some challenges, and we've been very grateful from the input of both Waikoiri and Saddle Hill Community Boards, who have been very engaged. The Peninsula prior to the new bylaw and since then have also been very good in terms of their feedback. We know we've got some challenges with the demand on sites, on those two non-self-contained camping sites, and we've been putting some thought and having some early discussions with the boards around how we might be able to tackle those. But I think as far as the approach we've taken in the bylaw and the approach we've taken to enforcement, the season has been successful, and our percentage of infringements paid would suggest to me that we are operating on the right level as far as how we're approaching ticketing, and that there is a general acceptance demonstrated by the fact people are prepared to pay because they know they've knowingly camped in breach of the bylaw, and that for us has been sort of a positive part of that year as well. So certainly not saying it's perfect. We recognise that, and we have already started working on some things for next season, particularly at the Ocean View and the Warrington Domain sites. We've given some thought to adding a further site for non-self-contained camping. At this stage, we haven't identified another site that's suitable and has the infrastructure, and what we are looking at is the potential for us to access that new fund that central government's setting up to pay for camping infrastructure. We don't have all the details on that yet, but that would give us the opportunity to identify a site that is outside or in a suitable area, even if it doesn't have the infrastructure currently, that we could then go and put the infrastructure in at little or no cost to the ratepayer, which is something we would be quite keen to as an option for a third non-self-contained site. So happy to take general questions.
General questions. Well, let me start. In terms of the issues that were raised by Mr. Owen about the state of the domain and issues around where vehicles park, you mentioned that in the report. Can you tell us what you're planning to do?
So we're currently reviewing a number of options. We've had some contractors out there doing some immediate remedial work to the area that's been worstly affected by the campers following the rain. We've also costing up the potential of, and if I had a map, sorry I don't, gravelling a section by the trees and quite close to the infrastructure for next season. So we're in the process of working through that now. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just add to that. The other thing that we've got the option of doing over winter, where we know the demand's not great enough, is put in some temporary bollards to limit vehicles to a particular area of the domain, so that and we can manage that through gravel or a surface in that area, because we know the demand's not great enough, so we can cut back the area that vehicles have access to. So there's a number of things we can look at, and our parks officers are having a look at the moment.
Thank you. In your report, paragraph 10, you talk about the monitoring of the apps that attract people and direct them. That has been successful. The companies are providing accurate information?
Yes, they are, and they're very responsive. They trade off the fact they have accurate information, so they're very keen to make sure it's correct, to the point where some of them will offer refunds on any fees, any infringements you get if you rely on their information and camp somewhere and end up with a ticket. So they are extremely responsive, 24-hour turnaround on information.
On the same page in paragraph 17, you mentioned the other park at Kensington beside the pub. Have there been problems there?
It's very popular. There's been a number of infringements issued there for non-self-contained vehicles who know they're not supposed to be there, but will slip in between the the self-contained vehicles and try and get away with it. But because our enforcement starts and finishes in town, we're there every night, so it's been managed, and I think for me, yes, it's popular, but it is a suitable spot, and there hasn't been issues like there were last season.
I know, crystal ball, I know, but this is the first season this regime has operated. Would it be fair to assume that word of mouth also operates here, or is it a cohort by cohort, year by year thing, and people look at the app, or do they talk to their friends and get a message about fines and what's expected?
It's very much word of mouth and social media. The word gets around very quickly, and that's also one of the challenges I think that may have been highlighted, that if people find sites that may not be monitored or are out of the way, then they have ways of getting that information around to people, and that's where we rely, I guess, on information, whether from the public, to say that a site's becoming popular for camping, and we can shift our enforcement program to deal with that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thompson.
We've got a number of car park sites in town that have toilets either as part of the site or adjacent to them. Have we looked at the ability of using car park buildings between, they're not having a floor that if you go in after 6 o'clock and you're out by 8 o'clock, there's no charge. If you're out after 8 o'clock, then it's going to cost you $2 to get the arm to go up or whatever. And are there other cities who have used that kind of infrastructure in that way?
Yeah, we haven't investigated that specifically. There's certainly some car parks. I recall some discussion around those when we were, again, developing the new bylaw, some of the central city car parks, and we shifted away from that in terms of not encouraging them to congregate within the CBD area. We haven't looked at the private car park buildings yet, but certainly something that that would essentially, we'd need to check how that would sit in terms of the safety aspect, but it potentially the open air car parks with the toilet that are DCC owned, certainly we could investigate those.
I would be interested to know if you could check with other authorities, because I've certainly heard that there are other authorities who have used tarmacked car parks that have got toilet facilities, and
so
I understand
Queenstown,
the safety issue, but I mean, equally, if you were to just park on your own in a domain late at night, it's the safety in numbers that make the difference, and we've essentially got a place in each case 20 or 30 kilometres outside of town on either side, or more than that, and this would provide potentially an opportunity for people to actually stay in town.
Yep.
Can I just follow that up before I go to the other three people I have? I've noticed a lot of self-contained vehicles parking in the area adjacent to the railway station at the end of that St Andrews Street intersection. That's quite a common thing. You see them at the market in the mornings, and they're not necessarily at the market. There are no issues there?
No, we haven't had any issues raised there.
That's great.
Councillor Wilson, in paragraph 34, you talk about looking at other sites. Now, for the purposes of the bylaw, that would have to be DCC owned or controlled sites?
Correct.
Okay, and so in order to add those in, if you've got a community group that wants to support you, they wouldn't necessarily have to go through the bylaw process. They could just put their hand up, or a private person with some farmland or something, as long as there's facilities there and potable water. That could be done outside of the bylaw, but be promoted by the city as an option or an alternative. Yes,
we would need to, if it was being promoted as a freedom camping, the issue of charging a small fee then becomes, is it a campground and other consents. But if it was for freedom camping, we would be happy to work with any groups who were looking to promote those areas and have them as part of what we're promoting.
And funding, because obviously there's some costs that come with those things, so those could be part of that negotiation as well.
Absolutely.
So the call is potentially, in order to alleviate Warrington and Ocean Beaches problems for other community landowners, to consider if they've got land that they could make available to the city on a very simple arrangement.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Jendi and Richard, a couple of broad questions and a couple of specific questions. The specific questions, 37 discusses the issue raised by NZMCA regarding current standards for certified self-contained. What are those issues, and are they causing issues for us in a infringement sort of capacity?
So those, excuse me, those issues are mainly around where the toilet facilities are in some of the smaller campers, and the move is to, the change is looking to be that those facilities will need to be available at all times. A lot of the smaller campers that you'll see that are certified self-contained, if the bed is down, those toilet facilities aren't accessible. So that is causing, we've not seen huge amounts of evidence in Dunedin over the past season, but around the country they are causing some serious problems,
right,
because people aren't using them. Yep. There's also the issue of rental companies have then reduced rental if they're not used.
Okay, so so basically it's just, for us, it's a compliance issue in the sense that we issue fines if they're not self-contained, but potentially there could be an argument that they are self-contained despite the fact that they're not accessible and not used.
Yeah.
Okay, so that should be sorted for the next season.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Department of Conservation, I noted that there's no feedback here from them or any other sort of environmental regulatory agency. How are we defining or measuring success in environmental terms of their current approach?
Their current approach or our current approach?
Sorry, of the current approach, of our bylaw.
There's no proactive monitoring of that going on as far if we're obviously responding where there are concerns raised, as there were in the peninsula last year. We haven't had those same concerns raised this year. We haven't had any concerns raised in the regular catch-ups we have with the department around some of their areas that I think they would be concerned of if there were adverse effects in those areas. So while there's nothing proactive, we've received nothing to, I guess, that would cause us concern that the current approach is having a detrimental effect.
So we haven't proactively asked for feedback, but we haven't received any
Correct.
feedback.
Yeah.
Would it be possible over the next season to put in place something that enabled us to have a slightly more proactive approach to asking whether or not there were concerns, or identifying how we might measure or not whether or not this is working from an environmental perspective?
Yep.
Yeah. The question I think was asked around, that Richard asked around, how we are identifying ways or where the issue might be moving to, or if the issue is moving, or which bits are now being highlighted as or flagged up on social media as new locations. Do we have in our sort of response team a proactive social media monitoring area, so that we go onto those forums and have a look at which spots are being highlighted as Dunedin Freedom Camping areas, or is it very much waiting on the public to flag them up as and when they're being used?
No, we do. Officers in house are regularly checking the apps. I wouldn't say that we're doing it to a forensic level as far as Facebook and the other things go. But as far as we certainly are monitoring the apps we know are the most used. And then if anything's brought to our attention, then we highlight that very quickly to our security companies. But as far as digging, I guess, further into the Facebook world or whatever other, we're not doing anything to that level at this stage.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I guess just a question on the issue raised by Reece around whether or not areas are gravelled or tar sealed. appreciating what you said about the fact you're considering that at Warrington for a certain area. Will that impinge on recreational use of that facility from other users' perspectives, and is it consistent with any management plans or reserve values that we've outlined in that area?
Yeah, it could impact, and that's why we're certainly only investigating that as an option at the moment. We're by no means confirmed anything we do needs to fit with that reserve, and first and foremost make sure that the values of that reserve are retained. But it is an option for us because it can be done in a temporary capacity, even if it was needed short term this winter while we look at what some of our options are.
Okay. And I guess a final question, but again, just having a think about the issues that, or the suggestion that Reece has tabled, which he says is consistent with the approach taken by 70% or whatever it was of other TLAs. Do we have any sense of what capacity there is in our camping grounds at that time of the year? So if we were to move to a regime where non-self-contained vehicles weren't able to park in these particular locations, do we have any sense of whether or not they would be able to move into camping grounds, or whether they're at capacity anyway?
I think that from the discussions that we've had with campgrounds, there would be very small times of the year where there might be issues. For the majority of the year, I think most would be able to find a spot. I guess the one thing I would say is if we were looking at a total ban on non-self-contained through the city, would be around the level of enforcement we would need to have to ensure that was actually what we had around the city. At the moment, by giving them an opportunity to camp in those two sites, we're confident that the vast majority are going there, and we can enforce around that. If we were to go for an outright ban, we would drive them into areas where they felt they were less likely to be caught, where they would cause damage environmentally and otherwise. So it's a very fine balance, and that was where a majority of the discussion we had around this table centred on when we were developing the bylaw.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Just a comment that Mr Owen made, and maybe you might be able to clarify. He suggested that Queenstown Lakes District Council are currently looking at a ban for non-self-contained vehicles.
Not that I'm aware of, but that's not, I'd stand to be corrected. I haven't been in touch with Queenstown
and that Canterbury, my understanding is that Canterbury have. Are you able to shed some light on that?
Christchurch had a number of sites that caused them a significant problem over summer, and they have moved to ban all camping from that area. I couldn't say whether they've gone for a blanket non-self-contained ban throughout the city, but I do know in some of the areas that they had permitted camping, they've now turned around and banned it from those areas because of the issues they're having with crowding.
Thank you.
Yeah, Richard, you just sort of touched on what I was going to speak about, and that was the banning totally in Christchurch. In some areas, what's the answer for people who, and Mr. Owen alluded to this in his presentation, that live in the area and they value the local domain? It's something they use frequently. And even though you've got people who are compliant and doing everything right, but they're still staying there and using the domain, so the locals don't have the full use of that domain for a lot of the summer period. What's the answer for those people?
It's a good question. Look, I think that's where in developing the bylaw the council needs to try and find that balance between protecting some of the values of the reserve, and obviously there's a portion of the Warrington Reserve that there's no vehicle access to that can be retained, but there is also a very large portion now that for large parts of summer have vehicles almost totally covering it for most days of the week. And I guess in council and making a decision on the bylaw and where non-self-contained camping will be permitted needs to weigh up those reserve values or the access to those areas for the community versus the provision for the campers that visit the city. So I don't have the answer, but that's essentially the decision that needs to be made.
So if if the popularity of freedom camping was to increase, and people are saying it certainly is, and you've got the example of Christchurch banning completely freedom campers or non-complying vehicles from those areas completely, can you see that happening in the likes of Warrington, which is a very good example? Is that the answer for the overpopulation of those camping grounds?
It's an option. I don't know if it's the answer. There would still be a high demand on Warrington from self-contained camping as well. I think there would be large numbers that would visit there because of the site and where it's located, and it would be incredibly popular anyway. I don't know if that's the answer on its own in terms of complete ban of non-self-contained camping.
Okay, and just one further question. Mr. Morrison mentioned about signage in different languages, and the chairman mentioned the freedom campers down in the railway station, and there are other spots around the city, like, for example, St Kilda Beach. Has there been any thought given to putting signage up in those areas saying that it's not permitted to have freedom camping in those areas? Albeit that it may not be areas of high demand or causing disruption, but nonetheless an area where we don't want people to be camping anyway, and having signs in letting people know that those areas are not available for freedom camping.
The approach we've taken to date is to have those signs only where the areas are included within the bylaw, so where they're prohibited or self-contained only, rather than having signs that then can't be enforced, which would put us in a position, I feel, where we were last year, where we had a bylaw and signs that we couldn't enforce, and I think that's a risky road to go down.
Thank you. Richard, has any discussion with staff and the campgrounds taken place in the last, say, 6 to 12 months?
Within the last 12 months, yes. Very recently, no, not in the very recent future, but certainly in the last 12 months and while the bylaw was being developed.
And the feedback from the campground owners?
Positive.
And have they been able to assist in some ways?
We haven't had any direct discussions or assistance from them. They were positive about the changes for more to a bylaw that was able to be enforced and would inevitably lead to more campers at the campgrounds. We haven't had anything from them since that time.
Okay. I asked Alistair about the Wakawai campground and if anything has taken place, and he referred that Mr. Collins was going to say something. So,
if I may, through the chair, that's probably a hospital pass from Alistair. There has been some discussion, not recently, in relation to the Wakawai camping ground. Their primary concern when we started looking at this was to ensure that they didn't have any direct competition in the Wakawai area. They don't see Warrington as a direct competing area. They certainly would have concern if council would start looking at a facility closer to that and their location.
Okay. Thank you. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm still going. You talked about self-contained and non-self-contained. What is the definition of that, and does a porta potty count as a self-contained?
So the definition is in New Zealand Standard. I can't recite it, but it's there, and yes, it essentially means that campers need to be able to be self-sufficient for 3 days. So that's for water and then grey water and wastewater disposal. So yes, a porta potty does, and I think going back to one of the questions previously, one of the main concerns now is the intent of that standard in terms of the type of vehicle it was designed for. Now, as happens over time, people are finding ways, I don't want to say around the rules because they are complying with the rules, but maybe the original intent of that standard is not being met in the type of vehicles that are certified, and that's the work that's happening with the Motor Caravan Association and motor rental companies to try and refine that standard and get it back to that point where the intent of being self-contained is actually what we're seeing out on the ground.
So someone taking back their camper after 2 weeks with the porta potty seal still being over the top and getting a rebate is not ideal.
No, it's not. No, and we're certainly not aware of specifics. There's discussion around the table at these forums that happens. We're not aware specifically, but that would certainly be a concern.
Okay. Jendi attended the New Zealand Responsible Camping Forum. How are we doing in comparison to other cities or other regions?
I think overall, in general, our bylaw has gone very, very well this year. Our recovery rate of tickets is good. The fact that it's at a national level that we do have designated sites for our freedom camping is positive, and is the National Forum's meeting again in September, and the sort of 3 work streams that are happening around information, and that's getting the campers when they enter the country and at the gate, and working a lot closer with the app providers and technology, and ensuring that the information that the people when they're on the road and they're looking for somewhere to stay, that it is accurate. Also around the infrastructure, and Richard alluded to the $12 million from central government, and we're keeping a close eye on that and whether we'll have some eligibility. And then there's sort of also the third work stream is looking at the infringements from a nationwide, and how they are administered throughout the country. Some councils don't administer any infringements at all, and we're just, I think that the group, the forum, is looking to try and have a bit of a consensus across the board.
Okay, perfect. In paragraph 26, you talked about the 296 infringements issued to non-self-contained vehicles parked in restricted areas. So Kensington Oval was one of them. Were there any other hotspots for that?
Kensington Oval was one of the biggest ones. There was we did have some issues around the car park St Clair Esplanade for a short time, but after some enforcement, again, that word of mouth and the apps, that mitigated that very quickly.
Okay.
They were our main hotspots.
Perfect. Are we doing anything in communicating to visitors about the best place for them to park during the day? Because I'm trying to park a camper van, and you see some locations around town and some awkward locations. Are we, we're talking about where they can stay overnight, but are we talking about where they can stay during the day?
Yeah, we haven't done that for this year, but certainly there's been a couple of meetings already sort of towards the end of this season, and over involving our eyesight team to start getting some of that information out, identifying the spots first of all, and then making sure that information is available to people.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Richard, regarding the investigation into new sites, I assume that will be an ongoing process, and you would be happy to receive information from the general public if they thought a particular site may be worth looking at or investigating?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Second question is the recommendation. In light of what you've heard today from the 3 speakers in the public forum, is the scope in that recommendation able to essentially consider what's been said today? And clearly there are a number of issues that we're trying to deal with. So is there anything in that recommendation that doesn't allow you to address, or not anything in that recommendation? Is the recommendation got enough scope to deal with the issues that have been raised today by the submitters?
Yeah, I think it does, and I think your comment before around that, while it's not specifically in here, we are constantly reviewing the options for additional sites, and we'd bring them back to council if we felt there was a suitable one. Otherwise, I'm comfortable that recommendation gives us the scope to do what we need to do before next season.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to move the recommendation when you're ready.
Well, I was happy to move it as well, but I did want to add another one, if that was possible, to the recommendation. I'll leave it to move in a second, and that is that you encourage staff to work with interested landowners or even clubs and societies to look at other sites that might be available for freedom camping, perhaps outside of the bylaw. Yeah. If the mover and second happily did. Yeah.
Anticipated payment rate. signage aside, essentially what you've already recovered has paid for the improvements to date. And so there's still another 28 outstanding, some of which we will receive, so that will also go to the one-off cost of the signage and increasing it as necessary, no doubt. Now, are there any more questions before we move to the approval? Councillor Ward wants to move it. Councillor Moon seconding. Are you happy with the second recommendation?
Yeah, I think I am.
Would you like to read it again, Kate?
Just ask a question of Kate to consider. Is it better turning the recommendation or your suggestion round so it allows landowners or people who have a particular site to approach staff rather than actually asking staff to work with? Because it seems to me like it's bigger than Texas. Where do they start? So if you ask them to contact their staff if they've got a suggestion to make, maybe just a simpler way to administer it.
I'm more than happy with that. Was my intent and out of my question earlier, which was if people have sites, and I think their message would be the takeaway one for today, if you think you've got a site you can work with us, please come and let us know. I'll come and, so the wording I had, but I'm happy to moderate it, taking that in, would be encourage staff to work with interested landowners or clubs and societies to look at other sites that might be available for freedom camping, perhaps outside of the bylaw. Because then it doesn't have to be under our bylaw necessarily. Yep.
Or we can soften it to make sure if the idea is to allow people to come forward, we can just, are people happy to vote on that basis, that we're going to massage the wording of it? Or do you want to wait till we've got the wording to argue about?
I agree in terms of what, yes,
Well, I guess the one question I would have about sports. The one question I would have about sports clubs, bearing in mind that they're on our grounds. So, no, but in a lot of cases, so it's, as long as we understand it's not, for example, Harbour offering Molla Park or...
Well, I mean, the wording is
work with.
encourage staff to work with people who may be offering or come out with an idea. I think it's fairly relaxed in terms of everyone leave. No further discussion?
Yeah.
There is further discussion. Is the mover like to speak to it? Second.
Just very briefly. Look, I accept that the issues that particularly Mr Owen has raised are things that council need to work on. I don't accept that banning freedom camping or particularly non-self-contained freedom camping vehicles will solve the problem. I think somehow we need to make this work. I accept the horse is bolted and that's no one's fault. We're playing catch up and we will do for probably some time, but I suppose we're asking our communities, particularly these two in the regarding to Warrington and Ocean View, we're asking those communities to be patient, and we will try really hard to get this right. And clearly by the budgets that are forecast for next year, we're lifting our game in that regard, and we've identified infrastructure deficiencies that we're going to rectify. So I'd like to think in the future we won't have these same issues being brought to council.
We're going to have this wording for the miraculous second, but in a moment, I hope. Councillor McTavish.
Do you have it now?
It's up to you.
Thank you. Just a couple of things that I would like to flag, and I guess it comes down to how we measure or monitor the bylaw. Now, I appreciate that this has gone much more smoothly than we could possibly have hoped, really, given the influx and the numbers of people that we have dealt with over the past season. I guess my concern is that I think we need to have some clearer indicators of success so that when we have a report like this come next year, we can say, from a community perspective, the following things were achieved or not achieved. From an environment perspective, the following things were achieved or not achieved. From a regulatory perspective, the following things were achieved or not achieved, which will give us over time a sense of trends and implications. I think I'm reminded a little bit of when you have congestion issues in a city and you think that you're going to solve them by increasing the number of motorways that you have in place. I'm not sure that that has proven to be a successful approach, and I think that there is a risk in simply responding to high demand for these sites by increasing the number of sites we make available. That means I do have some concerns about B up here. I think what we ultimately need to be recognising is that we can't forever cater for a larger and larger number of non-self-contained vehicles coming through the gates of our city and all expecting to park up somewhere beautiful and all expecting for that to be at no cost. So there is a limit to that, and we need to be finding ways to get people into other forms of accommodation, to get people onto public transport systems, and to encourage that kind of movement around our city and around the nation more broadly. And I appreciate that that is a broader question, and I'm really glad that staff are in conversation at that national level, so we might be able to steer some of the traffic at least in that direction. So that being said, I do think that the work that staff have been doing to look forward to next season in terms of infrastructure, in terms of improving the way that these current sites are operating is really good. I think that there is room for improvement in terms of how we deal with things like recycling versus rubbish. So maybe there is room to improve the outcomes in waste management in those areas, so that isn't such a cost to the ratepayer. But with all of that in mind, and hearing that staff are willing to consider perhaps stronger dialogue with DOC and other environmental regulators, we may be able to strengthen some of the focus on those outcomes for the next season, and I'm grateful for that. So with those provisos, I'm happy to support.
Just before we go to Mr. Colling, who wants to speak, I wonder if the mover and those two, I'm just a bit uncomfortable about the outside the bylaw in 3 words. I'm wondering if we could just change that to on private land, which would be. It's just that I don't think sending a message of trying to do something outside the bylaw is not a message I think is productive, especially.
Okay.
Inevitably, we're talking about private land here, otherwise.
Yeah, okay. It's
All
fine,
right,
so-
let's remove the last 3 words. Everyone happy? Yep. Remove the last 3 words. Done. Mr. Colling.
Thank you. The Community Board have always come to this council and said, look, we're supportive of freedom camping. We're mindful of the need to provide the infrastructure. But some of the basis of that decision is the opportunity that freedom camping, and in particular in Warrington, that it presents to the community for some of the facilities that we don't actually have. With the numbers we've seen over this particular period of time, it does provide for those with a bit of entrepreneurial skill, a bit of foresight to start looking at investing in these communities to provide the other services that are lacking. And this is one of the reasons why the board itself promoted turning the coastal scenic route into a coastal scenic route, because this will help the economics of our area. It may not happen on day one, but I urge this council not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We've had some teething problems. Staff have been very, very good at responding, and it's a continuing process. The limitation that others might on our boundaries, and I'm talking about Canterbury, I'm talking about Queenstown, might put on freedom camping by prohibiting within their own areas, should, if nothing else, put a throttle on the level that we experience. Thank you.
I think I probably have been one of the biggest critics of freedom camping around this table over the last 2.5 years, or nearly 3 years. I think we've come a long, long way, and I think the staff and what you've done in the last 12, 18 months has actually been, you've really taken on a mammoth job and really solved a lot of the issues that we had. We're still not there, but I think I have to congratulate you, because I think this has been, in some sense, a success for the city. And I know other regions around the country have been watching. Again, we're not quite there, but I don't think anybody can really see if they had the success formula, I think everybody would be bottling and using it. So I totally understand that. I also look at how the staff have worked with the Saddle Hill Community Board and other community boards and really have worked in partnership with them. And I know Scott Weatherall, the chair of the Saddle Hill Community Board, has been really appreciative of that, and so have the residents down in Ocean View and Brighton Way. I think the part that I look at is that if you just trace the growth of freedom camping in the last 10 years, it has probably been one of the largest parts of the tourism growth in the industry. Even more dramatic than, say, the Chinese tourism growth, but it's probably, from everything I've read and seen, has been the largest traction of the market. The part that I still want to stress, and I think is really important, is that we still engage with the current campground owners, and we actively consult with them and work with them. You know, the campground owners employ a lot of people, they pay rates, they look after the visitors that come to the city. I totally appreciate not all freedom campers want to go and use their facilities. Sometimes they definitely should, and sometimes they try to jump in and use them without paying. But I think we do have to support and acknowledge the work that the campground owners and the investment those people have made in their business, and we continually work in partnership with them. Thank you.
Look, I'm supportive of the work that staff have done around this, and I think that within the constraints of what they're dealing with, they've done an excellent job. But I think we are possibly understating the impact of having removed one particular area and all of the level of debate that existed around that area, so that in doing that it feels like it's become a much more manageable problem, but actually what we've done is we've just transferred it somewhere else, and now we're starting to get the impact of that. So and that's not a criticism of staff at all, it's just the reality. I do think that, Mr. Collins is right, it's about balance, but I do think that when you congregate an awful lot of people in a small number of sites, you are going to have problems, and we can feel as a city we have the thing under control, but all that possibly means is we've ghettoised it in a couple of areas and it's not under control there necessarily from the perspective of the local people. So for me it is about finding a few more sites, and I don't think Councillor McTavish's analogy is quite right. I agree that if you make anything easier, there is a risk that the numbers of people doing it will increase, but the reality is that we're a receiver. The problem doesn't originate here. The problem originates in Christchurch or Auckland, essentially, and we simply receive people in transit. So, to the extent that what we do is going to change the total volume, I think is only marginal. So there may be some people who will choose not to come to Dunedin. So I would really encourage staff to be looking at one or two other places, and I think trying to find something in the central city which might make use of existing infrastructure is at least worth a try. And it's not noted in there, but I'm assuming that staff will take that into account and give it some consideration.
I want to really emphasise with this is a problem created by legislation which we had no input into, and very little even through the select committee stage. It was a very fraught and very hasty arrangement, the first Freedom Camping Act. And so, given the context, we are only reacting. This isn't an ideal world at all. But I think what I see fraught in a lot of areas is where there's an expectation that a lot of infrastructure has to be built. And I think what we need to be slightly cleverer about, and why I put B, is that I think there's a whole lot of private land out there, not necessarily car parks, but actually rugby clubs, who've got substantial car parks that are used for half a day a week, that often have potable water and showers and lose available, that a community can enhance their own commercial operations that exist, and I'm thinking of places like the West Taieri, Middlemarch, and other areas that I know of that could benefit from the commerce that this could bring, but take away some of the problems that are we've foisted on two communities by the nature of only having two different sites. This is a growing industry. I have absolutely no doubt that there'll be substantial growth in it next year. We've no control over that. It has been promoted overseas, whether we like it or not, and we need to be prepared to react to that now and not wait for what is going to be, in my mind, an absolute disaster if we don't start planning and getting more sites available.
Oh, well, I'll just say that I do support this. I agree with what Councillor Wilson's last comments on B is, and I just am very conscious of the fact that these group are often seen as people who are sort of pariahs and don't spend money. I just add to this that I actually have met a lot of these people. We do host people at home occasionally or reasonably frequently, and I am often surprised at what they have spent money on their trips around the country. Obviously, the spend might be different if you go to somewhere like Queenstown where they've had a bungee jump or a jet boat ride or whatever, but the reality of it, a lot of these people are not just noodle munchers that live on the smell of an oily rag. Some of them do have quite significant spends, and I guess it's not my desire to cater for them just because they're here, but we do have to, and they are here and they are coming and they're going to come more, and I'm very conscious of that, and the better able that we are to look after them, the better results we'll get. And I'm also conscious of what Richard did say about ghettoising certain areas, and certainly like McAndrew Bay last year, we got that feeling that we had treated them badly, but I think there has been some good experiences, and I think if we can duplicate that and get more areas, we're going to be better off because of it.
Thank you. I'll put it. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. Thank you very much. That takes us to the final item, or the penultimate item on the agenda, which is the Planning and Regulatory Non-Financial Activity Reporting. Mr Blair and Ms McGill, if you would come up, please. Thank you very much to our hard-working Parks and Recreation staff. It's good to see this. I'm sure councillors will be interested in asking about various aspects of various charts. Would you like to make any introductory comments?
No, thank you, Mr Chairman, but we're happy to answer any questions.
All right, well, I'll move, before we go to questions, that we note the information provided. Who would like to second that? Councillor Wilson was first. Questions, councillors? You've got first question as well.
Well, it's a question and a statement, but I'd just like to say thank you. I'm sorry you're not introducing it in some ways, because I think it's a really good start to the reporting framework. I'm sure there'll be some comments along the way when we get our heads around it, but I think it's a fantastic start, and I don't want to... so my slight amendment to the motion would be to receive it with thanks.
I'm prepared to allow that non-question. Thank you very much. Any particular things that councillors would like to ask about any of the graphs? Councillor McTavish, I couldn't see your pen, it was against a black background.
Oh, sorry, I'll change the colour of my pen next time.
Green pen, please. Flashing.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, Ros and Adrian. My question just really relates, and this is something that Councillor Wilson I think has raised on a number of occasions, but it's really great to see these graphs. And I think Councillor Wilson has asked previously whether or not they are available in real time on the internet so that people can see where we're going in terms of particularly consent numbers and how they're tracking. Is that, has any thought been put to that, rather than just having them in the searchable database, you know, of reports that people have to trawl through?
Thank you. The online building consenting process, at the moment there is a space in there where you can see where the building consent is at. However, we have not got everything online at this point, so the answer to the question is partly, but we're certainly progressing towards that. That's in terms of building consents. I'm not sure what the story is with resource consents.
Thank you. I guess maybe it's a broader question perhaps for ELT, which is great to have this reporting coming direct to committee once a month or once every 6 weeks or whatever it is, but perhaps as a way to make it more visible on the website to people who might be interested.
Through the chair, I think that's our ultimate goal, that we will put as much information on the website as we can in order to make the processes as transparent as Adrian said. We do have at a granular level information about individual consents, but in terms of that holistic view, we're tending to rely on communications out to the community, our building community, via email through our mailing lists and so on, around where things are at. Which is something we did last week, for example. But it will be something we'll be working towards to make this kind of information more transparent and available on the website.
One of those tweaks that I was talking about earlier may be that if I look at page 15 and the building consent framework, statutory timeframes, I'm just wondering, is that the best measure? I realise it's a statutory measure, but is a better measure the number of days that it takes? Because if it was taking 21 days, in some ways, that's a, or if it was taking 100 days, which God forbid, actually that is the measure that people need to know, because if we're 1 day short, then yes, it's annoying, yes, it's frustrating, but this actually doesn't show if you're doing it in 5 days either. And I'm just wondering if the better, so if we've got questions like that, and we think there's a better way of reporting it, the question is, how do we give that feedback?
We can certainly report on that basis. If you're looking to give feedback, I would expect it to come probably through ELT, but we can certainly look at variations in terms of how we put the reports together.
Thank you.
I've got a question also about the sort of the presentation on 16, the graph 12, premises monitored and percentage compliant. Am I correct in assuming that in December 15, only 7 premises were monitored and they were all compliant? So the red line is not really a line, it's a point above the bar. That is a reflection of the number monitored in that period.
Mr. Chairman, the red line...
sorry, you've joined the dots in the red line. Is it generated by the blue bars below?
Yes.
So in January 1920, this year, there were one place monitored, and it was compliant.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, I think this is a work in progress.
But
I'm not being critical, because I think it's great to have this information available for us, and it will become more sophisticated as we proceed.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this particular graph is very much a work in progress because of the nature of the monitoring. Whether or not a premises complies, they can comply to varying degrees, and the action taken on when there's not compliance and how quickly it's taken. Yeah. So we're very much looking at changing this graph in the future.
Any further questions? Councillor Wiley.
Yeah, when I look at what am I looking at? Paragraph 11 and the diagram of building consents issued. If I look at July, August, September last year and average the three numbers 82, 84 and 76 out, I get an average of 80 or just over. And if I take January, February and March, 54, 62, 51 and average that out, it's around 56. Can you just expand on that, that difference? Is it staff related? Is it just purely staff related?
Through the chair, it's partly staff related and very much a number of consents related as well.
And is it because you have 2 less staff members? Because I'm just trying to work out how we've gone from, say, an average of 80 consents being issued within the time frame and then down to, say, 56.
Yes, it's a combination of a reduction in staff, which we're looking to recruit at the moment.
I totally understand that, yeah.
And an increase in consents coming in.
So if you look at your down 2 staff members, do you see a percentage down by 15%, for example, in getting consents across the line, or are you able to mark that in some way?
we should be able to. Our calculations at the moment are a little crude in that respect, and we're looking to improve that. 2 staff members I would not think would equate to 15 or 20% drop. However, we're as I say, we're working to better calculate that, and we're looking at our current resources and the way in which we work. So we're very much.
And I appreciate how hard the staff are working, and to see the extra time and dedication they're putting into that. So yeah, but when I look at that, I just want to make sure there's a reason for it.
Oh yes,
yep.
very much a
Perfect.
combination.
Thank you.
Just through the chair as well, I think it should be noted as well, we've received a significant number of large consents this year. I'm thinking of the dental school, which has just gone out the door, and that probably was one building consent officer for a number of weeks. Obviously, a large consent like that can skew the results of this, so that can also, in addition to the large number of consents coming through, maybe 20% extra year on year, plus a larger number of large consents. So that also can affect your workflow.
So I'd make an additional comment as well, not just the dental school, but the university, as we know, has a very extensive building program, the whole tertiary sector actually, and that combined with the consents about to arrive for the courthouse also present us with some challenges of which staff are only too aware. Right, Councillor McTavish.
Just a very quick question on 18, the Central City Plan Program Manager appointment. When is that expected to be made, Simon?
The recruitment's underway, but I'm sorry I don't have a date for you. I don't know whether Ruth... Sorry, Ruth, we're just talking about the Central City Plan Program Manager role. The recruitment's underway, but I wasn't too sure of time frame, which was the question of when that person would be in place.
So at the moment, the approach is we have gone directly to a firm, to Boffa with Rachel Eaton, who's pulling together the open space plan at the moment, to work with Glenn and across the organisation just to pull the program together. And just over the next month or two, we just need to work through whether it's best that we have someone on a fixed term for a couple of years, or whether we look to obtain the services of another firm to oversee it for us. So we're just working through that. But so that we're not delayed any further, that's why we've gone to Rachel, and she's working very well with Glenn at the moment. So we hope to be reporting in the not too distant future of where to from here.
All right, the motion is moved and seconded. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. That's agreed, and that takes us to any final item, any matters to be raised for consideration. There appear to be none. I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.